Now, in this edition of Let's Talk Some Star Wars, we'll be taking a look at the results of and your comments from the poll that asked the question, what rating would you give The Last Jedi? And wasting no time here because there's a lot I'd like to get to in this video, let's right away take a look at the results. Where we'll see that only 3% of the 50,000 people who voted gave this movie 5 stars and thought it was amazing. 8% gave it 4 stars, 14% gave it 3 stars, and that left then 26% of people who gave it 2 stars, and 50% or half of the people who voted gave it just 1 star and thought it was a terrible movie. And since this all adds up to 101% because of the way the percentages got rounded off, I'm going to do the same thing I did with the other results that finished the same way, and take a single point away from the 3-star or average rating, which then means when we do all the math here, The Last Jedi ends up with an average score of 1.88 stars and puts it in last place with all currently released movies, save the Clone Wars movie, now being completed. And before we really get into it here, I will put out the usual disclaimer that yes, since I am personally not a fan of The Last Jedi, those who watch my videos and partook in this poll are going to have a tendency to share my opinions on it, which clearly gets reflected in these results. However, there are a few very interesting things to point out here, as well as some things that I believe we can extrapolate from these results. First of all, usually my polls end up getting around 30 to 35,000 votes in the first week they run, with around 1,000 to maybe 1,500 comments left. That's at least been standard for the other 9 Star Wars movies up until this point. For The Last Jedi, though, there were 50,000 votes, 15,000 more than usual, and over 3,000 comments, which is 2 to 3 times the norm. And well, considering how lopsided these results are, and that of the 3,000 plus comments that were left, a vast majority of them were against the movie, I think it's pretty safe to say that almost all of those 15,000 extra voters who came out of the woodwork this time, but who had ignored previous polls just like this one, not to mention the 1,000 to 2,000 extra comments, are coming from people who wanted to go out of their way to show or express their anger and disappointment in regards to this movie. And this is, of course, where some will want to chime in and say, they're all just haters. But as I've tried to argue many times before, they're not haters. They're people who love or loved Star Wars and were utterly disappointed by this movie. If these people didn't really care about Star Wars, they wouldn't have come out in droves nearly 2 years after the movie came out to vote and comment on this poll. They would have just passed it over and gone on with their day. Besides, people have as much right to express their negative views and opinions on something as they do positive ones. And if people do choose to, quote-unquote, hate on this movie and do it for years to come yet, you can always choose to ignore them or to not let it bother you or to take it personally. Because no matter what it is, there's always going to be someone who disagrees with you or sees things very differently. And not to get too far off topic here, but there's this weird idea in the world today that people should stay silent for the sake of the comfort of others. That we should never ever say something that might offend someone or hurt their feelings. That people should never have to hear anything that may challenge them, their stance on something, or even their deep-held beliefs. But that's not going to create a perfect society. That will instead be what creates a society of closed-minded bigots. A truly enlightened person is always open to new ideas and is willing to let others challenge and possibly even change their worldview. Because trying to immediately silence others who disagree with you, even if what they say is negative and may hurt your feelings, doesn't make you benevolent, it actually makes you a tyrant. Besides, the harder you try to silence someone, the more you'll reinforce their beliefs and you'll likely end up creating yourself an enemy when you could have just let them speak their piece and at least tried to understand their point of view. Because silencing someone is not the same thing as changing their mind. Anyway, sorry for the little rant, and getting back on track here, as I've said before, the way Disney and Lucasfilm handled the backlash to The Last Jedi by pretty much officially ignoring it, though at the same time letting some of their associates attack the fans, only exacerbated the problem. Instead of trying to say or do something to quell the storm, they just let the writer and director of the film, Rian Johnson of course, essentially call the people who didn't like it man-babies, which, in my opinion, really just says more about him than anyone who criticized the movie. And look, not to just defend the haters here, because I do get it if you're on the other side of this. If you like or love The Last Jedi, you're just sick and tired of people trashing it already, and that's an understandable point of view. I get the mindset that it's been almost 2 years, and it's time to move on already. But this movie, for a lot of people, destroyed Star Wars, and in a much different way than the prequels may have destroyed it for some people years ago now. Because say what you will about the quality of the prequel movies themselves, but the story and the characters are all pretty sound and in line with the original trilogy. My views on characters like Obi-Wan, Yoda, Palpatine, Vader, and so on weren't radically altered or changed by those movies. In fact, especially in the case of Obi-Wan and Palpatine, they were enhanced to the nth degree, really. The Last Jedi, however, takes the perception of Luke Skywalker that the original trilogy left us with and changes it completely and utterly, but I'll get to more on that in just a little bit. Because before I just keep talking here, I do want to move on to your comments. But the main takeaway from this poll, I feel, is that it shows just how disappointed many people were by this movie. That they want to go out of their way to let it be known that they thought it was horrible and ruined Star Wars for them. And really, they just want someone to listen and acknowledge them and their anger. And you can call them a vocal minority of haters if you want. And at the end of the day, the some 37,000 people who gave this 1 or 2 stars is a small number when compared to the whole fan base, but it's still 37,000 people who, in a lot of cases I'd wager, are all but done with this franchise. And they're certainly not the only ones who feel this way, they're just the ones who happen to know about the poll and voted and commented. Okay, now on to your comments, and a big thank you to everyone who left one this week, and to those who voted, of course. This was by far the hardest time I've had trying to pick out which comments to use in the actual video, not just because there were so many of them, but because a lot of you wrote some really, really great, well thought out comments on both sides of this debate. Some of them, though, were just a bit or way too long to be read in the actual video, and I had to debate which ones I might try to read anyway. Also, because there were so many comments, and I did read, or tried to read nearly all of them, I didn't have time to get to artwork this week, so if you submitted something, please look for it next week. All that said, let's start, as we always do, with the top-rated comment, which this week came to us from Emmanuel Gonzalez, who said, "Whoever gave it 5 stars needs to be found. I just want to talk to them." And though I don't approve of the slightly threatening nature of this comment, I'll always start with the top-rated comment, no matter what it might say. I'm not going to go on a little rant about how silencing people is a bad thing and then censor someone in the same video. Anyway, I too want to talk with people who love The Last Jedi because I like to know what they see in it that maybe I don't. Differing opinions are not daggers that can hurt me, they're just information I can use to broaden my horizon. Which then brings us to this comment from Gustavo Valdaviso, and my apologies for almost certainly just butchering your name. Anyway, like many people who defended this movie, he focused mostly on the way Luke was handled. And though on the longer side, but certainly not the longest one I got, it was one of the best comments on this issue I came across, so I figured I'd go over this one or most of it. Anyway, he said, "I like The Last Jedi and I can objectively point out why, even though I know most of you wouldn't agree. First, let me say that this is a flawed movie, from pacing issues to irrelevant plot threads. I get why people don't like it. I mean, the whole thing about the First Order being unable of reaching the Resistance, what was that? Even within universe rules that don't make any sense. Also, saying 3 lessons and showing only 2 made me realize I'm definitely an OCD candidate. That said, I like the movie precisely for the reasons most people hate it. Grumpy Luke. Grumpy Luke felt real to me. That's what happens when you're not infallible like we wanted Luke to be. People argue that the Luke we knew would never try to kill his nephew in his sleep, and turn that into criticism of the direction. But that is the very same reason why that scene is so powerful. We, the audience, didn't see what Luke saw in Ben's mind, and whatever it was, it took Luke out of balance for a brief but decisive moment. What was it, I thought at the time? I want to see it too. You mix that powerful moment when our hero realizes that there are things out there that can still frighten the almighty Luke, with some 10 years of isolation, and you get Grumpy Luke. Okay, I'm going to cut it right there, though encourage you to pause and read the rest of the comment because he makes excellent points about what Luke does at the end of the movie and why he enjoys it so much. But there are 2 things here specifically that I want to respectfully disagree with. First, there's this weird misconception that everybody who hated The Last Jedi wanted Luke to be infallible or godlike. But that's not the case. We just didn't want him to be an utter failure. Luke making mistakes is one thing, and perfectly acceptable. Him running away from those mistakes to die alone is another thing entirely. Second, though that's fine and certainly acceptable that you're more intrigued by not knowing what Luke saw in Ben's mind that night that caused the reaction that it did. For me, however, it's just poor or lazy storytelling, because we have almost no context or information to explain a very radical shift in a major character. We just have to believe that one singular moment would destroy Luke after we watched an entire trilogy of films that built up a character with amazing perseverance who would never ever give up on his family and friends. Finally, and no disrespect intended towards you or anyone else who made a very similar comment, and there were many of you, but I really don't understand why people say that the Luke in The Last Jedi felt real to them. Did the Luke in the original trilogy not feel real? Because I don't know about you, but personally, I can relate to being a whiny teenager who wants to ignore responsibility and to instead go off to have fun with his friends and do his own thing, only to be bitten in the ass by reality and to have to grow up really quickly. I can also relate to Luke in The Empire Strikes Back, to thinking I know a thing or two and can handle myself, thinking I know better than those older and wiser than me, who want the best for me, and running off and doing something very stupid, only to end up having it blow up in my face and to beg those who warned me in the first place to not do it for help. And as I've said before, Luke dangling below Cloud City, begging Ben for help after his huge mistake, is the most human moment in the whole Star Wars saga, in my opinion. I don't need to see Luke fail again when, short of actually dying right there, it couldn't have gone any worse for him. I can also relate to Luke in Return of the Jedi, to a character who has learned from his past mistakes and come to a better understanding of himself and what is required or expected of him. I can relate to growing up, to putting my faith in something or others and getting rewarded for my patience and discipline. I, however, cannot relate to Luke in The Last Jedi, because like a lot of people in this world, well, like pretty much everyone in this world, I've made dumb decisions, costly ones even. I've unintentionally hurt people I care about with my mistakes. But I didn't run from them. I didn't hide and want to die. I wanted to make things right. And so personally, Luke giving up after all he'd gone through in the original trilogy doesn't resonate with me. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like that Luke Skywalker. And hey, if you connect with that, that's great. I can't say you're wrong. All I ask is stop saying it makes him feel more human when the original trilogy already did that perfectly. Okay, now I'm going to spend the rest of the video pretty much just reading comments. I'll give you some brief responses here and there, but this is already running pretty long, and since so many of you wrote comments, I do want to get to as many as I can. Anyway, let's now get to this one from AP, who said, "The producers and writers made the unforgettable blunder of failing to realize how crazy we fans are for Star Wars. They pissed on nostalgia instead of feeding it. In my opinion, though it's not as bad as The Never-Ending Story 3, this trilogy could have been bigger than Avengers Endgame. I have very little faith in the rise of Skywalker." Let's now move on to this comment from Brody Cash, who said, "It's not as bad as people build it up to be. It's got some great visuals and cinematography. I personally liked the way Luke was portrayed, and no matter how many times people say the lightspeed ram and the throne room scenes suck, I can't help but enjoy myself when I watch them. But the whole Rose and Finn aspect of the movie was just bad. Poe deserved better, and I would have been fine had Leia died in space. My biggest problem with the movie is that it didn't follow up on the setup of Episode 7, 3 stars. Then we have this comment from Cedric Ari, who said, 1 star. The Last Jedi will either go down in history as the movie that destroyed a legendary film franchise or the installment that woke Disney up and made them take the $4 billion purchase with some reverence. You know, like they do with Marvel." Then we have this comment from Chris Call, who said 3 stars. And I write this comment on my secondary account for fear of being lynched because I kind of like the movie. I don't mind the Luke aspect at all, mainly because the idea of him struggling like father, like son, is very compelling. There's just no context to the story. If one of the best TV shows of all time is made to explain how he reached the point of drawing his weapon on Ben, it would all seem better in retrospect. Like the Clone Wars show helped improve opinions on episode 1 and 2. Other parts of the movie simply don't work and never will. Leia in space is one of the most cringe-worthy moments in the franchise. Canto Bight is a complete misfire, though as I understand it, Ryan had bigger plans for it that never panned out. And of course, the hyperspace ram. We then have this comment from It's Me Alvaro, who said, "I'm not going to give it 1 star because I hate women or because I'm a hater. I dislike the movie because of the inconsistent tone, plot holes, terrible subplots, wasted characters, awful vehicle and alien design, the treatment of old characters, poorly written story, poor dialogue, poorly written characters, no hate to the actors or actresses, the major incompetence of each faction, and of course the main character being a Mary Sue." We then have this comment from Marcusk298, who said, "I gave it 1 star, not that it deserves 1 at all. As a serious Star Wars fan who has always lived and breathed Star Wars as long as I have lived, I felt truly empty after watching The Last Jedi. My dad and I watched it on opening night at 12, and I was truly hyped for the film after the awesome trailers. It actually pains me the choices that were made and the potential that was wasted with this movie." I still remember the looks of confusion my dad and I passed each other when the "your mom" joke was told. The comedy was totally not needed. But most of all, the part that truly breaks my heart is when Luke throws his family lightsaber over his shoulder for some sort of funny gag. Not only does this film totally disregard and disrespect the character and mythology and themes of the galaxy far, far away, but it goes the extra mile to insult people like us who care about it. I'm not a racist man baby. I'm a Star Wars fan who didn't like this movie for many cinematic flaws. Understand the difference, Ryan. Next up then we have this comment from Ziano who said, "This one is difficult to judge. If you ignore it's supposed to be a Star Wars movie, it's actually quite enjoyable. But in context of the Star Wars universe, it basically ruined canon for me. So as a movie, I'd give it 4 stars. As a Star Wars episode, I'd give it 0 stars. Somehow I settled on 3 stars, since I'm able to enjoy it ignoring the Star Wars components." Moving on now, we have this comment from Yvette Zentesi who said, "1 star. Forget Rey, forget Luke, forget Kylo, forget Leia. They took the one ever decent character in the entire franchise, the one unflappable, ever dutiful military commander who kept his cool under all circumstances, even as the glory hounds and hero wannabes went wild, even against his better sense. The one who first coined the phrase, 'May the Force be with us,' instead of 'May the Force be with you,' and actually sounded like he meant it. The one who truly saved the situation at the Battle of Endor by keeping his fleet around even as his ships were shot out from under him. The one who kept his duty even as the reckless glory hounds got all the accolades. And they spaced him in the blink and you will miss it moment, so that Leia could have her space angel moment and Holdo could swoop in from nowhere and steal the one moment that rightfully belonged to him. Sacrilege, I tell you, pure and unmitigated sacrilege." And though this comment is made mostly in good fun, I'd imagine, there is still a great point here. It shows that they really didn't understand that a character like Admiral Akbar meant something to people, that literally jettisoning him off into space to be forgotten without a single word would be taken as an insult by many fans, and that it's quite obvious the only reason it was done was to allow Holdo to step in and have a horrible subplot with Poe. And the final comment I'm going to get to here comes to us from Tori K, who said, "I already posted my response on The Last Jedi about 3 days ago. Since then, I rewatched 2 analysis vids on them, one positive and the other negative. Went through each comment section, which was a headache. Look, I like this movie a lot, not gonna lie, but I think we need to spend more time understanding one another. We need to stop assuming the extreme worst out of the opposite side. People who like The Last Jedi are not mostly traitors, SJW, agenda-driven, or lunatics. And the people who hate The Last Jedi are not mostly sexist, racist, women-hating man-babies. Forget Disney, JJ, Kennedy, Ryan, and even George Lucas for a second, because we all are Star Wars fans. We have a community that exists because we love it. Try to understand the other side's arguments respectfully. Do not go around saying someone isn't a real Star Wars fan because they disagree with your point of view of The Last Jedi. Let's not attack each other, please. I've already seen people on both sides quit Star Wars, real life and online. Hell, I almost quit Star Wars after the backlash. It hurt hearing people talk about something I really enjoyed in the theater so negatively. Now things are better since then. More people are being respectful and civil since 2 years ago, but I know we can do better, and what I want to see more of is the best we can be. Just putting my opinion out there. Y'all have a good day." Okay, so while I wrap this up, I'm just going to put a few more of the longer comments up on screen, and you can either pause them and read them in their entirety, or briefly look them over as they scroll by. But anyway, thank you to everyone who left comments, both on this poll and all the other ones in this series. It's been a blast doing these, rating these movies and talking about them, and I look forward to doing another series just like it. And you do have my apologies for not getting to more of the comments left on this particular poll. But I thought it was important to talk about what these results meant, because it's not proof that almost everyone hates The Last Jedi. It's strong evidence that maybe the minority isn't really so minor, and that a lot of people truly do not like this movie and want to express that. They wanted their voices to be heard, and it's not because they hate Star Wars. It's actually because they love it. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of what I or anyone else had to say in this video, or to offer up suggestions on what the next series of polls should be. Whatever the case may be, let me know in the comments below, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.